Well, are we ready to call to order or should we wait for a few more minutes?
Let's give it a full 5 minutes after just to let people work through any
I'm not
logging
sure we
issues.
have a quorum yet anyways.
Have you?
Hi, Julianne.
Hello, guys.
Getting TARDIS.
I will be staying on mute
Getting
much of the time for little people reasons, but I am here.
Sounds good.
Hi, Josh. I just elevated you to a panelist. And
thank you so much. Good
You're-
evening, everyone.
you are welcome. And then Ernest and then Richard, you also have been made a panelist, so you should be able to mute and unmute as well.
Thank you. I was wondering why I didn't have a camera. There we go.
And for those interested, you at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you can turn on closed captions for yourself. And also, just before we start the meeting, everybody should know that Charm TV is going to be recording this meeting, and it will be aired, I believe, tomorrow on Charm TV. So it shouldn't necessarily deter any conversation, but if anybody is camera shy, that is understandable. That being said, I do encourage everybody to have their cameras on. It definitely facilitates better conversations in my experience, helps people get familiar with one another and feel more comfortable. But obviously that's up to everybody's personal discretion.
My roommate is obviously not camera shy.
I'm liking the addition there, Ernest, so good.
Hi, Emily. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing well.
Emily, are you a commissioner?
Emily is new to us. I'll let Victor introduce her more fully when we officially start, but the answer is yes, she is. And then Victor, just so you know, I have been tracking attendance that people have joined, and I'm happy to run through that list just to make sure we don't miss anybody.
I think that's a great idea. If you've got the list, go ahead and call roll and see where we go.
Okay, sure. And then we do have one member of the public joining us, Nashana Kess, I see. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're just getting started now. Okay. So I'm just going to run down the list that I have in terms of attendees. If you do not hear your name called, please speak up. So I have Victor Tervala, Emily Levy, Matt Stegman, Ernest Lee, Andy Ellis, Monica Faulkner, Josh Harris, Julianne Tarver, Kathy Christian, Julianne Montes de Oca. And Ben Orr, I see that you're now here. Reverend Little, I see that you are now here. Is there anybody in attendance whose name I did not call?
Did I hear our co-chair, Terrell Boston Smith, listed?
I have not seen him. I will check the attendees list again just to make sure nobody's by accidentally logged in as that. There is a number here. If you are a call-in user and if your phone number, trying to click the detail here, is 410-340, could you just identify yourself for the record? And if you're a panelist, I can elevate you. You might not be able to actually speak. Let me unmute you here. There we go. Okay, so if you're 410340, I've just unmuted you. If you can just identify yourself so I can.
Yes. Hi, good evening. This is Ariel Harry Beth. I just unmuted. I got the directions to unmute. I was trying to join online, but I had some technical difficulties, so I'm calling it.
Not a problem. I just elevated you to a panelist, so you should now be able to mute and unmute yourself.
Ben, good evening. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Commission members. Ben, I asked two of my staff members to join to help me keep notes. Those names are Nishana Kess and Anwar Young. They won't be participating in the conversation, but they, will be there to help me take notes.
Okay, that's great. And Reverend Little, I know because you wanted to make sure of it, and that is an option here. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you should be able to turn on closed captioning for the video. And now that we're about to convene officially, I do want to remind everybody, so this meeting is going to be recorded by Charm City TV and will be aired at least tomorrow. And generally speaking, I do think they make those recordings available on their YouTube page for posterity's sake. So with that said, I'll turn it over to you.
Just before you go live, Mr. Chairman, I sent you an email shortly before the meeting started. If you could just take a quick look at that, I'd be grateful. Victor.
Just
while Vic is doing that, I'll just in terms of staff, I know myself, Ben Guthorn is here. Aaron DeGraffenreich, who is counsel to the City Council, is here. And Richard Krummerich, who is with Council Services, is also here. And I see Tim Goldsby as well from the Comptroller's office.
And Terrell Boston Smith sent an email saying he'll be just a few minutes behind.
Great.
Okay, Reverend, you were asking about my email. I think I put in the wrong email. So if you're looking at something that's odd, it is odd. Did you see that?
No, I was saying that I sent you an email. Did you respond to it?
No, let me see. Let me see what we have here. No, I can't. Here we go. Let me go back. No, I can't see it, Reverend. So do we need?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's nothing, not a big deal, but I did notice that in today's meeting materials, where we have the committee membership, I didn't see John Willis assigned a committee, and so I just wanted to make sure that he had a committee assignment.
Oh,
that was
okay. John Willis, and we don't have. Also, we've got a new member. Emily Levy, and she doesn't have a committee assignment either. Emily, do you want to, before we get to, let me see, Reverend, what's the name again who's not on us here? What is it? Who are we missing on a committee assignment besides Emily? Reverend?
John Willis.
John Willis. Okay. But before we get to John, let's Emily, if you wouldn't mind, welcome to our group. Can you talk a little bit about who you represent and why you're here?
Sure. Thank you all. I'm really excited to be a part of it. I am a lawyer. I live in Baltimore City. I've lived in Baltimore City for 30 years, so I'm excited. I work at a law firm called Gallagher, Villiers and Jones. And I found out about the vacancy through Ben, who you all obviously know. We both clerked for the same judge, Judge Friedman, before we went on in our careers. So I'm excited to meet you all, and thank you, for being so welcoming.
Great, thank you, Emily. And I didn't know, Ben, that you clerked for Friedman, so that's interesting. So interesting. Okay, well, let's get to before we get to committee assignments, and we'll work Mr. Willis in. and you too, Emily, about where you might want to fit in. Let's go and do our meetings, our minutes of our meetings, and make sure that everybody's on board. Those were sent this morning. If everybody can take a look at those, or if you have any changes you'd like to see, let's hear them. Give you a few minutes to take a look at them if you haven't looked at them already. They seem in pretty good order to me, so I'm ready to entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I would move to approve the minutes as submitted.
Mr. Chairman, before I have one on readiness.
Sure.
I'd like for the minutes to reflect the point that I raised about the lack of Latino representation on the Charter Review Commission, and the response that there were still some vacancies, and that a message would be shared with the appointing authority so that they could make the correction. I'd just like for that to be entered into the minutes, please, sir.
No objection there, I think. We can, Ben, if you can make that correction, please. And Kathy, if you want to just chat, you can just open it up and start talking.
Okay, I didn't notice just an end time. It's just we have the start time, but I didn't notice an ending time.
The ending time is 8 o'clock. If we can get done quicker, that'd be wonderful, but we're gonna drop dead at 8 o'clock.
I mean, reflected in the minutes of what time we adjourned, I should say.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's a little tiny thing, but you know.
I don't know when we adjourned. Ben, or any of the staff people, any idea of when we adjourned? Or does anybody else have an idea of when we adjourned? Or we just put a date and time in?
They did effectively kick us out of City Hall promptly at 8. So
There you go. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
8 o'clock it is then?
Well,
Okay, with the yes.
there was actually no formal adjournment motion, and because the agenda was exhausted. So under Roberts, once the agenda is exhausted, there's a pro forma adjournment.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Nobody would have noted on the amendment that there was a motion to adjourn, which was approved, because there wasn't.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned in the last meeting, I'm kind of loose on Robert's rules, so if anybody wants to pick up that slack, I'm happy to have them do that. So.
Well, Vic, I was going to give you a good one for minutes here. If you can simply call for more corrections, and if there are no further corrections, then you can say the minutes stand approved, because if everybody votes against the minutes, what's the point? So if there are no further corrections, they can stand approved without a formal vote.
Excellent. If there are no further objections or additions to the minutes, they stand approved. So thank you, Julianne. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece on our agenda, which is subcommittee assignments. And when we last spoke, the subcommittee assignments were basically assigned by staff. They said that they had an idea of what people's background was and where they should go. I understand that maybe not everybody's happy with that. Let me make a few points about it. Wherever you were assigned, at the end of the day, you can participate in any subcommittee you wish to participate in. We all can participate in anything we wish to join. I only hope that if you are a member of a committee, that you will show up for that subcommittee meeting. And at the end of the day, when there is a vote, then I think that only the members of the subcommittee should vote to approve or disapprove any particular motion that's there. But in terms of discussion, I want everyone to be free to participate. Is there any discussion on that particular point? Does anybody have an objection to that before we talk about committee assignments? Matt?
Not an objection, but I guess just a clarification to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Any recommendations that are approved by the subcommittee will then subsequently be, debated, discussed, and approved by the body as a whole. So even if folks miss being able to participate at the subcommittee level, everyone will have an opportunity to discuss and debate the work product of this body, right?
Yeah, great. Great point, Matt. Yeah, my view here is, and of course, we'll sort of work it out as a group. My view is that we don't make any decisions until the end. So we all go through the material that we have. At the end, when we actually need to make a decision, when every subcommittee has to recommend something to the committee as a whole, then at that point you have a vote. But in my experience, a lot of people change their mind as we go through. So you might see something that you are excited about and maybe want to target, and then you read some more and you think, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have made that decision. So I like to keep things nice and free and open until the very end while we close it on down and take those last votes. So whatever does happen in subcommittee, whatever final decisions are made by a subcommittee will always be discussed and debated by the committee as a whole. Any comments about that? Any discussion about that? Okay. So let's take a look at the committee assignments.
Hey, Vic, just quickly, just an attendance note. If attendee with the phone number 443977 could just type into the chat. Oh, that's Aaron. Well, great. We can't hear her. Bear with me. Let me unmute Aaron. I apologize for the delay here. Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
Ben, I'm on the phone to listen.
Okay. So Aaron can communicate. That's good. All right. All right. So let's go through the committee as they've been appointed, and we've got 7 people that have been assigned to the executive administrative functions. I think 6 people on the Board of Estimates, Finance and Procurement, and 6 on the Legislative Oversight Committee. On the Executive and Administrative Function Committee, and let me tell you a little about that. That is the bulk of that assignment, the executive, the mayor's office, but the bulk of that assignment is really all the administrative offices, all the departments. It's a big chunk of the charter, probably maybe half of what the charter is. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in there, a lot of detail. On that, we have Reverend Kobe Little is the chair of that. Ariel Harry Bess has been assigned, Nicholas Blendy, Andy Ellis, Monica Faulkner, David Fink, and Ernest Lee. Is anybody who's been assigned to that unhappy with that particular assignment? I'm not hearing any objections. Now,
Vic, this is Aaron DeGraff. Do you mind going through that list one more time for me, please?
I'm going to go a little slower then because I'm reading it. As I said, the chair is Reverend Kobe Little. Then we have Ariel Harry Bess, Nicholas Blendy, Andy Ellis, Monica Faulkner, David Fink, and Ernest Lee. Oh, and by the way, these were provided this morning in a handout, in an attachment that was put together by the Department of Legislative Reference. Those names are all there. And I see a hand going up. DOE WebEx. Somebody wish to speak?
No, I was just giving you a thumbs up.
Oh, thumbs up. Okay, thanks. I need it. Now, does anybody on the call wish to join? Like I said, everybody's able to join at any time. Does anybody unhappy with their particular assignment in another committee? Excuse me?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just like to address a nomenclature issue. Since we are the commission, these should be committees, not subcommittees. These are committees of the commission rather than subcommittees. So that would be my only suggestion. And then I think Mr. Willis wanted to be on the Board of Estimates Finance Procurement Committee.
Okay, that's wonderful. We're getting to that committee now, so why don't we go ahead and assign Mr. Willis to that particular committee? Ben, can you make that note? Okay.
Not a problem.
Let's go on to the Board of Estimates, Finance and Procurement. That particular committee, that's a tough one. There's a lot of detail in there. I think it's a lot of financial material. It's a lot of inner baseball that goes on in that particular committee in terms of very detailed stuff in many cases. So it's an interesting assignment. Terrell Boston Smith is the chair. Joshua Harris has been assigned. Benjamin Orr, Aaron O'Keefe, Julianne Tarver, and Doris Minor Terrell are all members of that particular committee, as well as John Willis. And finally, the Legislative Oversight Committee. I'm chairing that particular committee. We have Kathy Christian, Roger Hartley, Davon Love, Julianne Montes Doca, and Matt Stegman on that committee. Now, Emily, we'll put you on any committee you want. What would you like?
I would love to join the Legislative and Oversight Committee if that option is available.
Yeah, that's actually where I wanted to put you in the first place, but because we needed the extra person, so that'll be wonderful. So if we can make that note, and you're on that committee. So the next thing on our agenda is talking about committee meetings. The schedule of meetings. Now, I guess my thought is, and this is an open discussion because I know that people have their own world to deal with. They've got their own schedules to deal with, and we're trying to overlay those. I'm hopeful that we could have 2 meetings a month. Presumably, at the moment, we're not talking about public hearings at this point or meetings of the whole. We just need to get these subcommittees or these committees moving. And so I'm hoping that we can have every committee can have another meeting this month and then 2 next month. We'll talk about meetings of the whole in a moment, but that's what I'm hoping that we would have. The chairs of each committee would call those meetings based on whatever process they use, whether they take a poll about when people are going to be most available to that. I would, as I said, everybody should be able to attend any of these meetings that they want to attend. So ultimately, when a meeting is called of a committee, then at that point, we would have to have access. And I assume these would be remote meetings at this point, unless a committee chair wants to have it in person, that they would be remote and there would be remote access provided. And that access would be provided to everyone so everyone can participate. Discussion on that particular point? Okay. So at this point, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to be looking for a meeting of the Legislative Committee next week. I'm actually in New York in the middle of the week. So I'm looking for a meeting on Monday or Thursday evening. I will try to take a poll of the members of that and see after tomorrow. I guess I'll have that poll out and see if anybody who can show up on one of those 2 days. If we can't, it's possible to go to the next week, but then we're bumping up against the holiday, and I know that's a problem for most people. But So for me, I'm thinking about Monday or Thursday, somewhere around the same time as we're meeting today. And hopefully that can be accommodated by people. So I don't know, Reverend, I don't know if you've thought about it, or Terrell, Boston Smith, whether you've got an idea of when you meet next during this month. Any ideas there?
Mr. Chairman, I'll be reaching out to committee meeting members by email to ascertain what works best for the most members of the committee.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Now, staff, is there any problem with providing access to everyone on every one of these meetings? I assume there is not.
What do you mean by access? Providing
remote access, whether, the same thing we're doing today. Everybody would be able to get a link without a problem. Is that correct?
I'd have to confirm with Nina. I believe that WebEx is generally reserved for public meetings, and we can provide an alternative resource for internal meetings of the commission. But let me follow up and get back to the group.
Okay, that sounds good. So that's a schedule of meetings. Now we want to talk about public involvement and public hearings, or another way of saying that is when we all get together as a group. Under the charter, and by the way, one of the last articles of the charter, I can't remember which one it is, talks about how we're supposed to be conducting our business. I think it's Article 12, maybe 10. We'll talk about how the Charter Review Commission operates. What it says is that we have to provide at least one public hearing. And then we have to, by the end of May, we have to come up with a report. Now, it's possible and probably a good idea that we have more than one public hearing. My thought about public involvement, and once again, I have to figure out whether staff allows, whether this is possible through staff, is that at every meeting of a subcommittee, that the members of the public, we give the members of the public a few minutes, whoever may show up, to voice whatever concerns, whatever ideas they have about the charter. So we would have public involvement, ideally, at each one of the of the committee meetings, and then I see, Aaron, I see your comment here, but let me finish this thought. And then we would have maybe another sometime, maybe in February, to have a public hearing where we invite the public to show up and we can take their comments. And then another public hearing toward the end when we actually have something to submit. We're saying in that last public hearing, we're going to go in this direction. What are your comments? And we take that back and think about it. That's my ideas on that. But let's have a little discussion about public involvement, public hearings. I see in the chat, the City Council has 2 minutes of public comments per person at the end of each of their meetings. That's possible. We can talk about how we might want to structure that. My belief is, and my experience is that not too many members of the public show up to these things. And so we could probably give them, assuming we don't have a crowd, we could probably give them, 15 minutes to do whatever they need to do and be done with it. We want to hear their views. We want to hear their ideas, but we also need to get things done in these meetings. So that's my thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would be helpful if staff can help us with an email address or other vehicle by which people can submit public comment. I think that would be helpful and allow us to limit the time during the meetings for public comment, but not limit public input.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Ben, can you check into that? Make sure that we can have something that's available for those comments.
We can certainly facilitate that. Yes.
Yeah, and we have a website. Ben or anybody else on staff, what can you explain what the website is, where you can find it, and what's in it?
Absolutely. So the commission exists as part of the mayor's website under boards and commissions. So if you navigate to the city website, and then from there to the mayor's page, I could just share you while I'm doing this. So why don't I do that instead of speaking with you at words? I can show you pictures. Bear with me one moment. I'm just going to share my screen here. I apologize in advance. My computer's running a little slow. And of course, it's not going to work with me right now. But anyway, you go to the main city page. I apologize. I'll figure out this kink another time. Go to the mayor's website, boards and commissions. You'll find us listed right there. Available on that website are meeting minutes, public notices about our meetings. We can also add there a public forum for comments to provide comment to the Charter Commission. And then if the commission wants any other material specifically posted on the website, we can also make those available as well.
That's wonderful. In a discussion about that, and by the way, Reverend Little asked the other day whether we could have a press release, just basically notifying the public that we exist, what our timetable is, what our goals are, and ultimately perhaps how to contact us. I asked staff on Monday about that. They've referred it to the public relations person, and I've yet to hear back about that particular aspect. But that is something that we're looking into at this point.
Mr. Chair, can I add one thing on public comments?
Sure.
And it lines up with what Kathy just put in the chat. I would just ask that when we call for public comments, especially if they're going to be in person or on the phone, that we remind people that this isn't a question and answer period. It's simply they get to speak and we listen. It's not a dialogue. It's not a back and forth, because that can eat up a lot of time if people think they're going to be talking through issues in that public comment period.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Julianne. So I appreciate that. I've sat through many public hearings at this point, and delighted in the fact that it's not a conversation, and because it does take away. To the extent that a committee wants to entertain that, then they can do that. But it does eat up time, and so we need to be mindful of that. And that's why perhaps at the end of a session, we give just a few minutes for those comments. And if somebody's interested in how we've dealt with those comments, they can show up at the next hearing and sort of work with us on that. So that's my idea about that. And the public, like I said, the public hearings, as I said, my experience is that a lot, if we hold a public hearing, not a lot of people are going to attend, but I think we probably need to do that more than once. And I'm thinking once again, one at the beginning, somewhere maybe in February, and then another one toward the end. And if that seems, at some point, if that doesn't seem reasonable, we can visit that again, and we will revisit public comment, public hearings, that public hearing in February. I'm just throwing out the time at some other point too, if we wish to. Any comments about any of that? Okay.
Yeah, Chairman, this is Erin O'Keefe. I just had a question on the impact of committees reporting ideas or initial recommendations for public consumption. Can we decide upon a protocol to share that information? Or I don't see my chair here today, so I'm just questioning how we want to move forward with what we share.
Now, why don't you sharing with sharing among ourselves or sharing with the public? What are we talking about?
Both and.
So my view is, just off the cuff, Aaron, is that when we get a comment from the public, we make note of that, we discuss it, and only if we decide to move forward with it, the committee decides to move forward with it, do we, at that point, it becomes something more familiar. Now, let me tell you that when we are in our committees, there is no public information, the public information law doesn't apply because these are informal committees. This is what I understand from the law department. When we are in a forum like this, then we have the Open Meetings Act applies, all of that goes. And that means all the notes that we have, ultimately all the notes that we have are public documents, but the Open Meetings Act doesn't apply. So I think when there is notes that we take, so if we note what people are asking us to do or to comment on, they will exist in our notes and they will probably be part of our public record, as I understand it. But I think formal communication is really, at that point, is when the subcommittee votes it out favorably and they've done something with that particular idea.
I would like to request some standard format by which committees share ideas or recommendations from which we can communicate ideas and recommendations publicly.
Okay. Why don't you, why not put it together yourself and give us an idea of what sort of protocol you would like to have, and circulate that. And let's put that, I'm interested in it. And unless you have some idea that you would like to share now of how we do that.
I'd be happy to think about it and share it out.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable request. And if you can work on it, that'll be terrific. Okay. Okay, do we have any more comments, any more discussion about, and by the way, I'm talking a lot here and I'm hoping I don't do this ever again, but do we have any more involvement about public, any more comments about public involvement or public hearings? Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, what I would like to say about that, just for the record, as you have given us guidance on what this document is, what the charter is, it's the people's document. And so this Charter Review Commission has to be intentional about seeking the public input. And we want to make sure that we have public input for the commission's work before we make our report. Yes, we need to have a hearing to give the public the opportunity to give feedback on our report before we send it to the council. But really, to strengthen our democracy and to make sure that the charter continues to be, is, and or becomes the people's document, we ought to be making a special effort to solicit community input, public input. And I think the press release will be one thing that will help us to do that. I think the meeting notifications and the comment periods will be another thing. I think the website will be another vehicle by which we solicit public input. And I think it's important that all of the members of the commission our public input positive, and that we all do what we can to facilitate public input and participation in the commission's work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well said, Reverend Little. All right. Let's go to what we're going to get now. On the next item on the agenda is proposed charter amendments to date. And I was really talking about there is we do have charter amendments come in and they are enacted by the council. These are resolutions of the mayor and city council to amend the charter in certain fashion. We already have some that have actually been enacted, which means those charter proposals they're already going to be on the ballot. And so those are that's water under the bridge for us, where there's really no reason for us to opine on those particular matters that are already going to be on the ballot. That is something, of course, that we can discuss. Maybe we do want to do that, but what this particular next item are those resolutions that are still being kicked around in committee, that have been filed. They're formal pieces of legislation at this point, resolutions, and they're still being kicked around in committee. So I asked staff to come up with a list of what those are. There's only a handful of them, maybe 5 or 6 or so, just to discuss what they are. Just tell us what they are. And then we may or may not want to take those on. That is to give our opinion about whether we think that this is a good idea or not. It is fraught with politics when we do that. So I'm well aware of it, and I'm sure all of you are too. But it's something that we need to at least discuss. But at first, let's be notified of what those things are at the moment. So I've asked Ben if you could go through the list. And once again, this list was provided this morning in the email I sent. It's a big package of stuff that Legislative Reference put together. So Ben, if you want to walk through the ones that are here.
Absolutely. So in the package that was circulated earlier today, this is item number 6, titled Proposed Charter Amendments to Date. I'm going to go through what is identified in this list as the file number, but this is also the council bill number. This information comes directly from Legistar, which is the means of the council reporting its activities to the public. It can be found through the city council's website. I'm happy to distribute that link and provide any assistance as needed to the group in terms of navigating the website. So starting with Council Bill number 230456, Sustainability Fund, Acceptance of Fees. This resolution of the mayor and city council was introduced this past week, and it allows this particular fund to accept fees as they may come into the city for any particular matter. Each charter fund in and of itself has a particular listing of means of receiving monies. The main source of that obviously would be the ordinance of estimates or the city budget or any supplementary appropriations. In addition to that, oftentimes there is permission or the authority to also collect monies through fees or donations or other sorts of items to that extent. It is pretty standard language, and the fact that it wasn't already available for this particular fund most likely was an oversight, frankly, in drafting more than anything else. Moving to Council Bill 230450, approval or veto of legislation. This particular item amends the mayoral veto process and the means of effectively how the mayor would be able to respond to legislation passed by the council and the timing of that response. Moving to the next item, Council Bill 230445 broadens and effectively adds meat to the provision with respect to establishing the Baltimore City Police Department. when this item was previously on the ballot before voters, all it did was create the entity. It had no further detail beyond that. This amendment comes from the work of the Local Control Advisory Board, which was a public body that was required to meet and convened through state legislation. And the members were appointed by various different elected officials, as well as required members from various different community organizations. Council Bill 230444, Inner Harbor Park. This charter amendment specifically deals with what we would understand as the area surrounding the Inner Harbor, starting at Rash Field near Rusty Scupper and circling around effectively to right past the National Aquarium. When this area was originally conceived, when it was developed, it was conceived of as a public park. And as part of that public park, over time, there were specific parcels that were permitted to have particular types of development. The pavilions, which are now understood to be pavilions 1 and 2 that surround the Inner Harbor, the closest intersection would be to Light and Pratt Street currently, is effectively an erasure of any height limitations and also a permission to develop multifamily housing and also permit parking within that space. Otherwise, the current plans for the redevelopment of the Inner Harbor would not be permitted per the charter. Council Bill 230380, Community Reinvestment and Reparations Fund. This fund is meant to establish a non-lapsing charter fund that would effectively collect the allocation of monies from the state related to the sale of cannabis in the state. And state legislation requires a certain proportion of those monies be allocated to jurisdictions based on a certain history of that particular jurisdiction with convictions and arrests and things to that extent relating to cannabis. Council Bill 220326, repeal of term limits. This particular bill would undo the most recent charter amendment that imposed term limits for all citywide elected officials. Currently now, the term limits for city elected officials are 2 terms. So for mayor, comptroller, council president, and individual council members, they would only ever be able to serve for a maximum of 2 terms, each term being 4 years, 8 years in total. Council Bill 220243, the Department of Real Estate. This is a fairly inside baseball charter amendment, which had been proposed before the prior election, but never made it very far in the council. And it has to do with specifying that the head of the Department of Real Estate shall be the director, and that shall be appointed by the comptroller. Council Bill 220224, Sporting Tournament Scholarship Fund, and Council Bill 210092 are 2 separate bills also creating charter funds, and they are fairly self-explanatory within the description. I won't labor those points. Are there any questions about any of those items? I see Aaron O'Keefe. So Aaron O'Keefe in the chat is discussing that Section 9 of the charter per Victor's 2018 memo is not actually charter material and is legislative in nature. And she's requesting that Vic effectively opine on that a little bit.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that in just a minute. I mean, so when you looked at this stuff and you thought, I don't know what they're talking about, that's a clue about what we're going to be dealing with in terms of what's proper and what's improper in a charter. But let's hold off on that, and we can get back on some of that stuff in a minute. I see Andy's got a hand up, right?
Yeah, thank you. What is our relationship to these charter amendments that are going through the city council? What power do we have in relation to them, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have every right to discuss them and to opine, whether we believe that these are reasonable or not. Let's suppose that we can all come to an agreement about whether they're reasonable or not. Whether we want to do that is something we need to talk about, because we have people who are excited about this stuff, and we can wade into it. So, but the bottom line is we have every right to have an opinion and to express that opinion. And what I would like to do is assign each one of these ideas to the various committees, the appropriate committees, and I'll let the committees deal with it and see if they want to go forward with it. If somebody else has a better idea, Richard Krumrich, I see you got your hand up, so you can. Yeah.
We should at least be conscious of what's out there. Have run the risk of passing a whole.
We lost you, Richard. Can't hear you anymore. No, can't hear you.
Hear me now, Vic?
Now we can. Now we can.
Okay. You run the risk of having an omnibus package that has provisions that conflict with some of the standalone bills, and that's actually happened before. And be resolved, but you may wind up with them canceling each other out. So you aware of what's out there.
Matt, did you want?
No, I can't hear you, but.
Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. Richard, okay, can you hear me now, everybody?
I can hear you now.
Okay, and Matt, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I guess this may be another worthwhile point of clarification in terms of what the final work product of this committee is. So are we providing a report to the mayor and council that the mayor and council jointly or separately can propose, can pick and choose and propose as resolutions to be passed through the regular process and certified for the ballot? Or are we presenting something that is that there, I don't believe there's any, but is there some mechanism where whatever we propose just is going to be presented as a package for the council and the mayor to consider through the legislative process?
There's precedent for that. The Judge Cole Commission in the 90s package, and it was introduced to the council as a bill. They made a few amendments, but it was intact.
Let me explain.
But that would be at the election, I guess. You tell me, I guess top level what we're doing is, that would be at the election of the mayor and the council, right, to decide, we want to take the entirety of this report and turn it into a resolution to consider, or we want to pick and choose or take things as a, different set of one-off. But consider the recommendations individually. We're providing a report, and they're going to do with it what they will through the regular process, correct?
Right. Let me explain for everybody who doesn't know how this process works. So at the end of the day, we're going to recommend to the mayor and city council changes, whether we add material to the charter or delete material from the charter. And we'll have a public hearing on that before the council, and we'll present our ideas to that. It'll be drafted, the language will be precise. It'll be drafted by legislative reference, so they will know exactly what we want to do with each one of the provisions. And then we'd leave it. And the question of the next step would be for them to actually sponsor a resolution, because we on our own, we can't introduce legislation. All we can do is recommend it to the mayor and city council for a joint resolution. So we'll do the recommendation. At the end of the day, if they like our ideas, or at least some of our ideas, maybe not all of their ideas, ideally, it will be found put in a resolution, and if those resolutions are passed, then it becomes part of what we see on the ballot in November. So that's where we're going. We're going to have a report. We will have the full 9 yards, and we will have a hearing. Well, our intent is to have a hearing before the city council. They have to agree to it, but I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. Well, I'm assuming we will. Okay, and now, so, Andy Ellis has also, I've sent around, I guess it was yesterday, the day before, a set of 7 different proposals of how we change the charter. I've assigned those to various committees that have the topics, the related topics. So, Ben, if you want to say something, and if you want to say something about them, my idea is that each one of the committees will take those things up, and Andy will provide whatever detail is required to get those things really moving. Andy, you want to say anything about those proposals?
I'm happy to talk about them, or they can just come up in committee if you want. What is your preference?
If someone has an interest in it at the moment, we can talk about it, but I just let's just move on, and you can present that detail, because I provided the most stripped down detail as possible in that little presentation that I made the other day to him. So that's what's there. But chairs, if you're listening, you already have been assigned some of those items, and the items that Matt just talked about, the ones that are in committee. I'm going to assign those to the various committees too, according to their topics. Okay. Any other discussion before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, the next agenda item are the guiding principles. And these are basically, the idea here is that we have constraints on what goes into a charter. There are legal constraints, and we should be aware of what those are. They are laid out in tab 2 of the binder that you received. It's 3 or 4 pages or so. It's really worthwhile taking a look at if you haven't already. And it's really important to know what those constraints are. Does anybody, do we want to talk about them a little bit, or is everybody comfortable with them, or should we have a little discussion about what those are?
I'd like a brief discussion about what those are.
Okay, let me be as brief as possible. Oftentimes when people come to a commission like this, they have sort of the view that this is a constitutional convention of the type of thing that we had back in 1788 and 1789. Anything is possible. We can put anything we want in the charter. But unfortunately, the way it works is that local governments are creatures of the state. We have rules about what local governments can do, and particularly how the mayor and city council, how they govern. But not only that, we also have rules about what we can put in a municipal charter, in the city charter. And those are the principles that you really should be familiar with. The idea here is, when we talk about the charter, everybody has an idea that it's our constitution. So basically, we're just talking about how the government is constituted. We're not talking about how we regulate behavior, the persons, places, and things outside of city government, outside of our little entity of government. The charter only talks about the internal mechanics, the internal organization of the government. It's not a regulation of anybody beyond the entity itself. So that's sort of rule number 1. Rule number 2 is that, understand, as we just got through talking about, the mayor and city council don't have any direct control over what's in the charter. they can only suggest content of the charter, or take content out, add content, they can only suggest it. The only way that a charter is created and the only way a charter is amended is through the voters. So ultimately, because the voters determine what's in the content of the charter, then I think of the charter as the people's document. It's where the people tell the government how it'll be constituted, how it's run, basically establishing the basic principles, the basic components, organization, and the basic policies of the government. So those things come from the Maryland Constitution. Under the Maryland Constitution, there's only two ways that you can amend a charter: put things in or take things out. The first way is through the petition process. And that works this way. You know, if the voters of Baltimore City get together and they get together a petition, and the petition will have the exact language of a proposed charter amendment. If they get that petition together and circulate it among the voters, and at least 10,000 registered voters in the city sign that petition, that material, that proposed charter change, goes on the ballot, and the voters decide whether it's charter material. That's one way. The other way is by council resolution, where the council recommends certain changes to the charter. And as we just got through talking about, it's through a charter joint resolution of the mayor and city council to change this charter in a particular fashion. And that becomes part of the ballot question, and ultimately the voters vote on that. Bottom line is, the voters always determine what's in the charter. Now that's interesting, and that sort of begets the idea that there are rules about what the voters can control in a charter. Because the voters aren't particularly knowledgeable about our billion-dollar operation. Some of them aren't even particularly interested about how it operates. So based on that, the courts have established that a charter can only talk about the broadest design, the basic constitution of our government. So we're really just talking about the basic components of our government, the basic organization, and the basic policies. So what are we talking about? What's basic? Well, we're talking about, do we have a mayor and city council? We're going to have a city council, but having a mayor is an option. The average voter doesn't need specialized knowledge in order to create an informed opinion about these types of things, about our governing body. It's the same thing we can talk about whether the comptroller is an elected official or whether he's an appointed official. Or we can go to the big ideas about our city council. Should we have 15 members elected by district, or should we have fewer members, that some of them are elected by district or some of them are elected by at large? All of these are things that the average voter can have an opinion about. It doesn't take specialized knowledge. Now, if you have specialized knowledge, you can talk a lot about these things and really know all sorts of things, but the average voter would be able to come to an opinion on these things. And that's essentially what the courts say is proper charter material. The basic components of government, the basic organization, and the basic policies, the fundamental policies under which we govern. Everything else is considered detail. And detail is another way we talk about legislation. So we have this dichotomy between what is legislative subject matter and what is proper charter material. Legislative subject matter can only be enacted by a legislative body, which means the city council, if we're talking about Baltimore City. Legislative subject matter, the details of government have not been delegated to the voters of Baltimore for the reasons I just got through speaking about. So when we're talking about something that really is inner baseball, some of the complexity about how government should operate, how these administrative bodies should function, how certain finances are handled, and it gets really complicated, that's when we have to sort of back up and figure out, do we have something that's proper charter material? And the reason why we're concerned about proper charter material is that if any thing comes to court that talks about a particular charter provision, and the court rules that the charter provision in question, is legislative in nature and not proper charter material, all the actions that's taken in accordance with that improper charter material can be voided. So that's why we need to be concerned about what's proper and what's not proper. Because when you have improper charter material, you basically are risking the city at some point of getting in trouble with the court. Now, having said that, we have a 250-page charter. 100 pages is devoted to the legislative powers of the city council. Those come from the General Assembly. We can't touch that. So we get rid of 100 pages. Our job is to review 150 pages of the charter. Now, if you think it takes 150 pages to talk about the basic components of government, it doesn't. It takes a whole lot less. So when you go through it, you will find things that are suggestive about being improper charter material. It's not a bright line test. My test is when you read a provision and you don't know what's going on in that provision, you can't, not because it's badly written, it's because you don't understand the concepts that are being, or the significance of the concepts, you might be looking at improper charter material. But there's another piece to this. Even if we think that we have improper charter material, we should note it. But the next question about whether it should be deleted is a big question. It's very difficult, politically difficult, to delete something from a charter once it's in there. That's because interest groups are around those particular provisions, and people don't realize that if you take something out of a charter, you can always make it an ordinance, because everything that you see in a charter can be it's expressed as an ordinance. And an ordinance, as we just got through saying, can only be affected by the by the mayor and city council, whereas a charter provision can be affected by the voters. So, anyways, we need to be conscious of these rules as we go through the charter. But once again, the idea of cutting something for a charter becomes really a political football. And as I mentioned the last time, in 2018, we tried to cut a lot. We tried to prune it. Because when you have a lot of detail in a charter, not only is it improper, it really bogs down the government from reorganizing itself, from trying to be a lean, green fighting machine. You can't. You got to fight through 150 pages of detail in order to do anything. And having been working with city government for many years, I can tell you that it becomes a bit of an albatross, all the various provisions that we have in a charter. So we tried to cut, and it was a lot. It was a lot of stuff. So what we're going to be doing is taking a look at two different things. We're looking at existing charter provisions. So when we look at those things, put on your glasses, see if you can identify what you think might be improper. It doesn't mean that we're going to cut it. It just means it should be noted. But then we're also going to be looking at new additions. People want to add things to a charter. We want to be very careful about adding anything to a charter, because once it's there, not only might it not be proper, but more importantly, once it's there, it's really hard to cut. And who knows what the politics are going to be in 20 years, whether that's going to be necessary. So it's very tough. So that's basically what we need to say about the basic principles that we operate under. We have to understand that there is legislative material and what we consider to be proper charter material. And we do with that as we wish, but it's something to be aware of. Now, Andy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question about the form of the amendments that we would suggest. And that would be, if we decided that we wanted to eliminate 45 pages of different sections of the charter that were all not charter material, but were in different articles and sections? Does it have to be per article and section, or can there be an omnibus? How does that?
Yeah, I guess I would leave that to legislative reference to put together. I think we'd probably go by article, but that's something that we would fool with. And legislative reference would be the experts on those types of things. I can't hear you if you got more.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly appreciate and value your years of experience as it relates to the charter and the guidance that you've offered us here. I'm hopeful that you can clarify for me if the courts have issued a legal definition or have established a legal test for what is charter material versus what is legislative material. Because, and I'm asking this because while I value your perspective, I'm of the opinion that democracy is certainly less efficient than dictatorship, but where efficiency is not the highest, value. And so even though democracy may be more like sausage making, it may take more time, it may not be neat and efficient, it's important to be inclusive. And so, you know, I don't hold the view that there are issues that are not interesting to the electorate or that are too complicated for the electorate to understand and therefore take a position on. Yes, the reality is that there is inside baseball, but I don't ever think that we should be taking the position to institutionalize or to affirm the concept of inside baseball. I think that our charter should be open to input from the average citizen. But I do appreciate the distinction between what should go on a charter and what should be legislative. So I'm curious to hear from you if the courts have established a test or offered a definition.
Reverend, they have not. There's no bright line test between what's legislative in nature and what is proper charter material. The only thing the courts have said over and over again is that we can only deal with the components of government, the basic organization and the basic policies. So once again, I mean, I'm sympathetic to a lot of what you said, but I'm only just talking about what the law requires us to do. And you will read when you get into the charter, you will read a bunch of things. And I know you are one of the interest groups that are involved with some of these provisions that to me would seem to be questionable legally. But on the other hand, politics is the name of the game here. So we're going to be talking about this a lot, and people are going to have different opinions. Some things are going to be really clear. I think some things are going to be I don't know if we need to have that. But on the other hand, as I said, to cut something is very difficult. Although understand that if we cut something, we can make it conditional on an ordinance that does the identical thing that you see in a charter. And that gets the problem out of the charter and places that official pronouncement where it should be in the legislation and not in the charter. So it's a really interesting little game we play, and I don't mean game in a pejorative sense. It's a really interesting exercise that we get involved with here. And as I said, we're going to have differences of opinion, and I certainly respect people's opinion about what's important. But, you know, I'm a lawyer at the end of the day. I'm looking at the rules, trying to follow the rules, and yet I'm also a member of the city, and I understand these things are some things we want to have in the charter because of the wonderful expression of sentiment. But politics changes. A lot of the stuff that we're seeing in the charter these days is like what seems to be on the horizon right at the moment, but in 20 years, will it actually be? Shouldn't it be put in legislation? Those are decisions. Those are the kind of conversations that we're going to be having.
Vic,
Well, Mr. Chairman, you and I are certainly in agreement on the rules, which is why I asked if there was a legal definition or a legal test. But I do need to clarify for the record that while I lead the Baltimore NAACP, the Baltimore NAACP has not taken a position on any charter issues or any issues related to amending the charter in the 2024 cycle.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Answer to the question about legal opinion, 1978, the charter amendment approved that was proposed by petition establishing a system of rent control, creating a whole agency and an enforcement process. And that was struck down by the courts as being improper charter material. I remember Al Figinski was the plaintiff. So it's Figinski versus somebody, probably opinion is 79. So that's worth looking at.
Thanks, Richard. I can tell you that the courts have struck down a variety of charter material in charters, not necessarily in the city charter. I'm aware of a lot of county charters, or not a lot of, but we've had problems with county charters. For example, tax caps. When you have a provision in a charter that says the rate of tax shall be whatever, this particular rate of tax, that has been struck down as legislative in nature. Why? Because the legislative body is the entity that's supposed to be setting the budgets every year. And if you put exactly what the tax cap is, that's not appropriate. What you can do is say, what the courts have said is that you can put a cap saying you can't have a cap rate, you can't have a tax rate that goes above a certain number, but you can have a tax rate underneath that number. So if you have a cap, that's okay. But if you have a specific tax rate, the courts have struck that down as being legislative in nature. So there are consequences to these types of things, and there are those kind of things out there that we need to be. But as you point out, Reverend, there is no bright line test. But as I said, this is sort of a yeasty conversation. There's lots of things to say. Juliana, what you got?
So my constant thought when looking at the charter is just about the readability of it and wondering how much we can do to improve that. For example, looking at Article 8 franchises, it is block paragraphs of get lost and have no idea where you are. And other sections are better tabulated where it uses the outline format so you can really read it and follow it a lot better. And so I'm just curious if past commissions have, as they have changed things, as things have been added, it looks like that block paragraph format has been put away. But is there any way we can wholesale improve that?
Legislative reference can talk to that, but let me tell you, that particular section, Article 8, is something I've spent a great deal of time over in the last couple of years. That hasn't changed since 1898, so that's why we've got this great big block paragraph sitting there. Can we do charter revisions that just talk about style? We've had a wonderful legislative reference has been wonderful about making things legible. Or better able to read. It hasn't taken a full-scale swipe at the charter, as you're pointing out. Ben, you've got a comment on that?
So legislative reference generally has the permissive authority to augment the organization of a particular section of the code or the charter to enhance the understandability, with the huge caveat of ensuring that the content is in no way affected by that. So in as much as we want to change the structure of the franchise section of the charter, I think we can definitely speak to law and ask them for an official opinion about whether or not we can just effectively update that in terms of its formatting, which I'd argue is not worthy of a charter amendment. But some might, because it could be interpreted as a content change. So I don't want to speak to that, but we do generally have facility to quote judge the formatting.
Reverend?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay. Anybody have any discussion about principles, guiding principles, however we talk about them? And I really hope you get a chance to read tab 2. If you haven't read it, it does a nicer job of handling what I just was talking about a few minutes ago.
Vic, I will just say, just as an anecdote, if you read previous reports from various different charter commissions or charter review commissions, the degree to which individual commissions focus on a particular issue and or focus on, quote, cleaning up the charter varies year to year, decade to decade, century to century. So as you said, the 2018 report in large part focused a lot on what is or is not charter material, and panels prior to that focused ostensibly on organization or the flow of power. And so, you know, the focus of that is certainly up to the commission itself. There's no, you must do X or you must do Y. And if anybody, I did provide those in the Charter Review Commission, kind of that original binder. But if anybody's interested in additional committee reports or other materials, please just let me know and I'll make sure to make them available.
Yeah, great point. The principles are only about what the legal principles are. What we focus on is depending on wherever we go with these types of things. And you know, we can talk about new material. Maybe that's more interesting than reviewing existing material. But I think we are obligated to take a look at the existing material, make whatever recommendations we have, and entertain new material as it may be introduced. New material, as I suspect we will get some stuff over the next couple months, and we'll see how that is handled and what we do with it at this point.
And I apologize. I believe Mr. Hartley did have his hand raised before I spoke, so I apologize about that.
Oh, no, you didn't necessarily jump in front of me. And I also am aware from being on Zoom how hard it is to see people's hands at times. You may have answered my question, Ben and Victor, but I think where I was going with this is you're right. I think in a previous, in the 2018 commission, it sort of felt like much of the discussion was on cleaning up language and maybe removing outdated language. But there's also, of course, really the opportunity to consider changes to that very structure of government. And I think some that would be very positive, if nothing else, for us to discuss and maybe our community to discuss, even if it is difficult to change that structure of government. I have a couple ideas I'll float at one point in time and maybe, as a political scientist, get laughed out of the building. But that's, something that I think we really should consider. I strongly believe that we have a system of government that has worked for many, many years, but it certainly could be improved. And there are ways, in fact, that the charter could be changed that might change dynamics and power to make it more efficient, make it more professional, and make it a government that can get things done a little bit easier than it does right now. And maybe we shouldn't shy away from that if that's okay, to at least discuss. And they may not make it out of the doors of this hall, which would be great.
That's a great point, Roger. And that's what's fun about this. It's great stuff because we really do have the ability to take a look at stuff, play around with stuff if we want to. We have to figure out whether it's going to be, acceptable at the end of the day. But it is really interesting. I've always enjoyed it. That's why I've spent so much time on this particular subject matter. So if we're done with the discussion, any further discussion about this, we can revisit it, and we will revisit these types of things as we go on in our committees. It's just inevitable that we do. But anybody else have any comments? Otherwise, we'll start in Article 1, and we don't have that much time. And Article 1 is interesting, and it raises all of the issues we were just talking about. There's a lot of stuff in there that I think is inner baseball that would probably be kicked out in a court of law, but it has been very popular to do the things that we see in Article 1. So without further ado, we can get into Article 1. My idea is just to start on Article 1, and then you have an idea of how we go about looking at existing material, and then we pick that up in our individual committees. Okay, so let's go to Article 1, and let me point out that, and these are it's in your binder, it's in the last, Article 1 is in the very last section of your binder. We have notes that the law department and legislative reference have made about various sections of each article. And they have a lot of notes about Article 1, and you'll see them, grab it. And you'll see them in Part 3 of Tab 2, and that's pages 4. Start on page 4 on tab 2, and you'll see that they have made some comments about Article 1. And we don't have to be beholden to the comments. We don't have to, agree with the comments, but we should at least be aware of what has been pointed out by the law department and by legislative reference. So I'm going to just talk. I'm going to look at that as we go through it, and I'm going to read actually what is in this first part on page 4. It says, under the above principles, that is what we just got through talking about. Most of Article 1 is non-essential. The charter needs to include provisions on Section 1, the corporate entity, which are standard charter material. But sections 10 through 14 concern establishing certain funds by ordinance. Typically, establishing funds and accounts is a legislative act. A strict application of the guidelines would have these sections deemed improper charter material. These funds were created before the council had current budget authority to add or strike lines of appropriations in the ordinance of estimates. While popular with council members as tokens of commitment to certain issues, these funds are not proper charter material and now may be stricken. So we're right into the things that I think are, political. But let's sort of move right into section Article 1, Section 1.
Mr. Chairman, before you go forward, if you would, there's a comment in the chat. Commissioner O'Keefe raised the question, and I'm hoping that you can address this as it speaks directly to what you've just mentioned. And that concern is that oftentimes the legal department returns with an answer. If it's not in the charter, then we can't do it. So hoping you can address that.
Let me see if I can get more of that, whatever's in that chat.
Sure, I'm happy to weigh in here.
Could you go ahead and Erin, go ahead and say whatever you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very real and important idea of charter impropriety versus the day-to-day implementation of work for agencies and leaders. And the tension between, unless the charter says you can do something or not do something, the law department says you may or may not have the power to do it.
Yeah, let me tell you, the way, if it was clear that there is no, as I said earlier, at the very beginning, I said we have rules under which the city council operates, and those are given by the state of Maryland. we really can't do much. We have to live within those rules. Now, when the law department says, presumably in most instances, when the law department says you can't do something, it means you really can't, because the general line is if you can make an argument that it's allowable, the law department typically, in my experience, has been saying, okay, go ahead and do it. And as long as we have an argument, if we have to go to court on it, if we have an argument about why this is proper, we go ahead and go forward with it. On the other hand, if they really think the argument loses from the very beginning, then they don't go there. In this particular instance, the law department is saying it's improper, but they're also saying they understand the significance to those people who this is appealing to the interest groups that these provisions are really affecting. And for this reason, I think the law department is saying, we think it's illegal, but we're not telling you can't do it. Am I answering the question?
I think you're sharing a philosophy, and that's helpful.
Yeah. And let me tell you, in my position as chair, I want to do whatever the majority thinks. I might have an opinion about something, and as I do. But at the end of the day, if the idea is that we need to hold on to something, then we need to hold on to something. So that's where I'm at on this. And I think a lot of that stuff, I love the idea that is mentioned there, that we have a change in situations. We now, under this July, I think it was, the council is able now to strike items from the budget and add items to the budget. They never were able to do that before. There's a provision in the charter that says that the fiscal policy of the city is determined by the Board of Estimates. The law department a long time ago took a look at that provision and said, well, that means that the council cannot direct where funds will go. It's basically a budgetary item, and the budget is created under the language that you see in the charter, and that didn't give any power of the council to add material to the budget. So given that, the last couple of years, we started creating all these special funds in Article 1 that, because we said, well, if it's not in the charter, the council can't add these things. Well, then the council said, okay, well, we're going to start adding it to the charter. So we started having a variety, I think from 10 to 19, I think at this point. Those sections are all about creating special funds. Well, today, we don't need that language in there because the council now can budget those items on an annual basis. So there are pros and cons to that, but that's basically that explanation, what that language of Department of Legislative Reference and the Law Department, that's basically where that's going. Okay, that was fun. Let's go ahead and talk about the very first section, and that's corporate entity. And this is pretty standard stuff. So, it just basically says the inhabitants of the city are a corporation under the name the Mayor and City Council of Baltimore, and by that name shall have perpetual succession. And you can read the rest. May sue and be sued, may purchase and hold real property. All of that stuff is pretty standard. It's nothing we should be cutting, playing around with. It's just really standard language. And you'll find that in every county charter and city charter, municipal charter in Maryland. The definitions on section 2, take a look at them. I don't want to read through them, but take a look at them. These are things that keep coming up. This language keeps coming up. You might look at the term officer under F. We're considered officers or municipal officers, shall include, but shall not be limited to the city administrator, heads of all departments and bureaus, the members of all commissions and boards, and persons who exercise authority comparable to that of the heads of the department. So every time you see a municipal officer, that term, that can refer to us. Just take a moment to take a look through that stuff. Okay. So moving on to section 3, property rights, trusts, and gifts. There's a note that's by the law department and legislative reference. It says how the city deals with these subjects, property rights, trusts, and gifts, are policy matters, and policy can be appropriate for charter material. But the policies presented in this section are unremarkable and of no significant reason to exist for their inclusion in the charter. So let's take a look. All the property and franchises of every kind belonging to, in the possession of, or hereafter acquired by the city are vested in it and may dispose of any property belonging to it in any manner and upon the terms provided by the charter. I'll let you read the rest of that particular provision. There's nothing remarkable here. My view is I wouldn't think about cutting it, but it's certainly cuttable. Is there take a look at it, and if there's any discussion on it, we can hear it. Yeah, it doesn't really do any harm to keep it in here. It's just more material.
Chair,
Yep.
I was about to say the same thing. If I were to pick my battles about what to cut, this wouldn't be the hill that I would die on.
Yeah, very good. Me either. Go to section 4. There's a note on section 4. This subject is handled by state law and need not be in the city charter. It's about condemnation. If you take a look at it, it talks about the condemnation process. It is all handled in city law. A lot of these provisions, let me tell you, a lot of these provisions were put in here prior to home rule. Our charter was originally written back in 1898, and it was written by a legislative body. They put in a lot of legislative material, and they put in a lot of stuff that has since been put in general law, and this probably was one of them. So it exists here. It's not particularly a sexy topic. It's certainly something that we can cut, but whether we want to indulge in that for the reasons already stated, it's up to us. Any comments? Okay. Section 5 is the uniform application throughout the city, public ways. This is kind of a goofy little provision because it says the charter will apply to every section of Baltimore City without distinction, and all existing streets, avenues, roads within the city, therefore all of that, as I mentioned to you earlier, the charter is really about how the government operates. It doesn't regulate anybody beyond the city government. So when it says it applies to every road thing, beyond the government itself, it's really not what the charter is about. It really doesn't apply. That's legislative in nature when we talk about regulations that affect the persons, places, and things beyond the entity itself. But it does no harm to hold it.
What's your understanding of why that clause is in the charter? It's always important to me to understand the history of the provisions so that we understand, why they're there or why they shouldn't be there.
Yeah, my understanding about this particular provision is that it was here in 1898, and we now have the Declaration of Rights in our Maryland Constitution, and one of those rights deals with the uniform application of laws. I suspect this was just something that's been held over, and no one thought it was objectionable. I mean, it really doesn't matter. but it isn't something that really, it really is more legislative in nature than anything. And the same thing with uniform taxation. That really is another thing. The taxes, that's on section 6, will be the taxes levied by the city with respect to the ownership of the same classes of property or property shall be uniform throughout the city. That's in the Declaration of Rights too. It's just not something that we need to have here. Once again, this is all extra stuff that doesn't necessarily need, but whether we, to use Julianne's term, we don't need to necessarily die on those hills. And we can take a look at these later, but this is the reason why we're going through it as a group here is just to sort of get the feel for what we're dealing with here. Records and reports.
There's a couple hands up, I think. Apologies.
I'm sorry. Please just go ahead and speak, Aaron.
Yeah, Vic, this is incredibly helpful. And thank you for wanting to run us through it. I just wanted to check in with folks and make sure that they hadn't had the opportunity to read this in advance.
Yeah, it's a lot. All of these sections are tough to read because you really don't have a really good idea unless you're a lawyer and been dealing with these issues. But that doesn't, as I said, most of this stuff has been here for a long time, especially in this Article 1 provision, until we get to the end, and you'll see what those funds are. Those are all new. Anybody have a comment about what we're looking at?
Victor,
Richard, go ahead.
Yeah. One of the answers to Reverend Little's question was in 1898, there was controversy about Fells Point considered itself a separate city, and but it had been.
Oh, can't hear you, Richard. You just went off. That was an interesting observation. What'd you say? We can't hear you.
Let me come back. Okay. When the charter was adopted in 1898, Fells Point considered itself to be an independent city, and it couldn't be run by the city charter, but it had been annexed in by election, and the charter made it clear it was now part of the city.
That's interesting. I didn't know that little piece. That's good. Other comments?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, moving on to records and reports. We've got a note on this one. Purely administrative and should be deleted. Much of it is also unworkable considering the general public general laws that was adopted after it was included in the charter. There was in our 2018 report, we knocked this whole thing out, and what we put in was new language saying, the mayor and city council shall provide for appropriate record keeping, and the public shall have the right to inspect public records in accordance with state laws. It's a nice little, pithy little statement, but let's go see what's here. A suitable record of all proceedings, financial transaction, and official acts of all municipal agencies shall be kept and certified, and a certified copy of the record or any part thereof under the corporate seal of the city shall be admissible in evidence in any court of the state as proof of such record or a part thereof. It goes on like that. All of this is taken care of by public general law, essentially. A record shall be available for public inspection unless otherwise expressly ordered by the head of an agency or the municipal officer by or on behalf of whom the record is kept. Well, that's not true, but that's what's in the charter. So, as I said, take a look at, we talk about microfilms in the next piece.
I was about to ask about that. Or does the city in fact still keep records on microfilm?
Go ahead, Ben.
We continue to maintain records on microfilm. We are no longer actively creating records by microfilm, but that may be changed.
Annual report. If you go down to annual report, other information. Unless otherwise directed by the Board of Estimates, every municipal agency of the city shall prepare annually a written report of its work and proceedings. I don't know that's ever been, in my world, it hasn't been done.
So I will say that some of the comments in the memo as added speak to how frequently those provisions are currently followed. And as a department that I would say adheres itself to what is written in the law and takes it quite seriously, the frequency of somebody following that law is not necessarily important to whether or not it's an important law. So whether or not somebody actually creates the annual report does not make the requirement to do so any less important. And I say this wholeheartedly as the self-centered department that is responsible for collecting said things and maintaining said records. So if anybody were to take care or empower us to enforce said provisions, we would greatly appreciate it. But there are entire gaps of history that are currently not covered from the city because those annual reports are no longer created. So anyway.
I think that's a good observation about that.
I think that Ben makes an important point. The law says that there's a specific time for when this commission is supposed to be convened and operate. And we don't want anyone to say that since the law is not being followed and hasn't been followed for many census cycles, that there shouldn't be a charter review commission. So I do think it is important for the public to be educated not only about the charter, but also the laws of the city, the ordinances of the city, because ultimately it is incumbent upon the public to hold elected officials accountable for following the law. And too often elected officials don't follow the law and they get away with not following the law. And then people think the law is no longer the law.
Yeah, but you have to understand what the significance also, you have to balance that out about what the significance of these things are. That we need records, that we need record keeping, and that the various agencies provide whatever information is required in order to run the government. That's really what we need at this particular point. So whether we need this kind of detail in the charter, it needs to be, as I said, what we tried to do back in 2018 was just have a little thing that appropriate records will be kept in accordance with the directions of the mayor and city council. We can leave it. I think I think when we look at this section 7, the very last piece, C2, we have C1 and then C2. C2 seems to be new to me. I don't remember seeing this, and I think that's an interesting piece that's new, and I'm going to read that because I think when I look at 7, I think C2 is significant, which says, upon request of the mayor, the city administrator, or board of estimates, every municipal agency shall promptly supply the mayor, the city administrator, or the board with all requested information with respect to the practice and proceedings of the agency, provided, however, that this information need not be given with respect to any undetermined policy or opinion, nor shall the Board of Municipal Zoning Appeals make any disclosure as to any pending appeal other than to furnish a copy of the testimony and papers filed with it pertaining to the appeal. Maybe that's important. And I think, is that new, Ben? I don't remember. You weren't around when that was kicked around, I think, but maybe you were.
I'm not so certain it's new. Certainly the addition of the city administrator is new, but I guess from glancing at it, it speaks to a time when the balance of power was really here or there, depending on which part of the city you were in, and the obligation to provide materials was questionable. I mean, I think it's interesting that we have to call it the fact that you have to listen to your boss when they ask you for something.
It seems reasonable, especially you have to give it to the city administrator, who basically supposed to run the whole show when we're talking about the agencies. So anyways, I'm going to move on. And what we're going to do, we're glancing through this just to sort of give us a feel for what's here on section 1. We'll come back to section 1, this article 1, at another time when we've all had more experience of dealing with the charter and to figure out whether or not, to use Julianne's term, whether we want to die on the hills of taking stuff out or whether we want to spend our capital on more important issues. Let's keep on going for the next few minutes. Official time on section 8. It's a kind of a goofy provision. I mean, official time of the city shall conform to the standard time. We don't need that information anymore. But there it is because it was probably put there at a time when it was.
Mr. Chair.
What's that?
Mr. Chair, I also noticed on this that it appears that the official time here is describing a shift for daylight savings time, which no longer conforms with the way the U.S. government does it. It appears that daylight savings time starts in here on the last Sunday in April, whereas elsewhere in the country, it actually starts in March.
Yeah, no, interesting. No, it's a good observation. As I said, it looks in quacks obsolete. So, but it does no harm if we leave it in too, I suppose, although maybe we have to comply with it because it is in the charter. So maybe we should take it out because it's screwing everything up. But, that's something that we can play with. I want to go to number 9, and this is where we start getting into politics. As Ben related earlier, there is a current charter provision that amends, it's in committee, that amends the Inner Harbor Park. And if you've been reading the news, it's because we've got development that's going on or proposed development that's going on. And so in order for that proposed development to do what they want to do, I guess the idea is that we need to amend this particular section. The note on number 9, because we have a note on number 9, is that the dedication of a park is legislative in nature, and that is absolutely true. The topic does not concern the basic organization, components, and processes of the government. It is improper charter material, but its deletion probably would cause consternation. There it is. We get right into the subject matter, sticky subject matter right there. And as I said, if we are interested in that, we're going to need to take a look at what the proposed charter amendment is. Although when you were looking at it, when you were reading it, Ben, I didn't know, I couldn't follow exactly what was being discussed, and you would have to have some sort of knowledge more than mine to figure out what's being discussed there. Once again, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that part of it is already echoed in code in that the zoning code designates Rash Field as open space, which would be saved from any sort of vertical development or other, quote unquote, improvements upon the land. Save that particular area, the remainder of that, quote, Inner Harbor Park is available for development, but, that particular section of the charter was developed in and around the time of redevelopment and attempting to protect that land for the public. So there are any number of different considerations that go into that provision. I do agree, technically it's definitely not charter material, but
Yeah, usually you would basically pass an ordinance on this, but because it's politics, they wanted to show everybody that it was going to be preserved forever, as opposed to just legislative in nature. And as I said earlier, legislation can only be changed by the governing body, by the mayor and city council. You put it in the charter, it can only be changed by the voters. You put it in an ordinance, it can be changed at any time by the mayor and city council. But that's the whole point. Some things are legislative in nature, and it should only be changed by the mayor and city council as opposed to the voters. But here, there's a good argument about the public's desire for that space to be used as a public park. So there's an argument to keep it in the charter and why it would exist, and that's what I think that note says. It might be problematic to try to remove it. I suspect we're not going to probably fool around with it, but those are some of the issues.
Mr. Hartley has their hand raised, as does Andy Ellis.
Go ahead. Andy?
Yeah, I want to ask a question about if there is theory or research on how many charters are a good number to be on the ballot in order to allow voters to have clarity on it. So like a ballot crowding question, like if there is question A through Z, does it decrease the intelligibility of the questions to voters, et cetera?
Well, I'm unaware that there's been any study about that.
I will tell you that the council certainly does not care.
What?
The council certainly doesn't seem to care about the number of items that they put on the ballot.
Maybe the political scientist will weigh in at some point.
I'll give it a shot. The closest thing that I could say to this, I'd have to look, Andy, is that, charter provisions, especially for voters, are often written in ways that can be somewhat unintelligible. And honestly, on top of that, there's voter roll-off. They're often stuck at the very bottom of the ballot. So by the time a person gets down through, all of the judges, no offense to anybody, they get a little worn out and they don't spend the extra time to vote on those additional provisions. In general, overall, not specifically to everyone, of course. So yeah, I think the more you clutter it up by having many of them, the more people sometimes behaviorally step back and say, I'm not touching that.
Yeah, and a lot of times, Aaron, go ahead. Aaron?
I don't want to distract from this conversation. It's really great. And I'm conscious that it is 7:58 p.m. And I'd like to propose that we make a formal recommendation for committee chairs to review each of these 2018 recommendations at the committee level in their next meeting. And that subsequently we at a full commission meeting, probably in early February or mid-February. I look at the schedule right now and I see committee meetings. I also don't see the full slate of our committee heads here at this meeting today. And I'm concerned about our work moving forward.
Yeah, those are all good comments, Aaron, and I appreciate that. I am too. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got a very short period of time. And at the end of the day, if we are going to move forward with any item, we need to bring in the council. We need to sell our ideas to the council. So we need time to do all of that. Yep. Richard?
Yeah, 2 quick points on the multiple questions. The one time it becomes very controversial is if they're contradictory. There have been times in which two redistricting plans were put on a ballot, and then there's a variety of approaches. Sometimes if they both pass, the one that got the most votes is considered adopted. Sometimes neither one of them is adopted. Now, back to the Inner Harbor Park issue. One of the reasons for that charter provision was to take it away from the Department of Rec and Parks. The area by Light Street was Sam Smith Park, and that was under the jurisdiction of Rec and Parks. So this now you created the separate entity to run the Inner Harbor Park, and it could only be changed by charter, and it decreased the council's control over it.
That's good, Richard. Good history. Thank you very much for that. We are at 8 o'clock, and we need to adjourn at this point. And the idea, once again, is that we're having committee meetings. Aaron is suggesting that the chairs take up this particular provision, this particular article in each one of the subcommittees. I think that would probably be the best thing to do. I'll leave it up to the chairs to figure, how they want to schedule that material, and even how they want to schedule new material that may be coming in. Some of the stuff from Andy's coming in. the stuff that Ben was talking about, the things that are already in committee, how you want to handle that, when you want to handle that. So anyways, at that point, I think, as I said, I'll be trying to schedule the legislative committee sometime in the next week. If we can manage that, I'll put something in the email tomorrow. I'll leave it to you, to the committee, other committee chairs to do whatever they need to do to get their meetings going. But as I said, time is very short, so I'm hoping that we can have at least 2 meetings a month, and we'll figure out when we meet as a whole. Any other matters before we? Yes, Ben.
I just want to tell the group that almost everybody on the commission attended the meeting tonight. So I just want to thank everybody for making the time to be here tonight and to being so involved in this process. I know it's not easy to carve out 2 hours of your evening at any time. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, and I do appreciate that. It is dinner time. I appreciate that, and we're running over at this point. So thank you very much all for attending. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, before we adjourn, I just do have a housekeeping note. Virtual meetings generally provide the opportunity to keep a record of who's in attendance. So it's not necessary that we would do a roll call, other than the fact that it helps people who are participating in the meeting to hear who's actually present. But just want to make sure that staff has made note of who's present, and if you'd be willing to share that with the chairman and the vice chairs as soon as possible, that will afford us the opportunity to do some outreach and to express a desire for those who aren't present today to participate in the future meetings of the commission.
Certainly. Reverend Little, I did read through the attendance list. You may have missed that just at the very top of the meeting, but it will be included in the minutes and certainly will be made available both to yourself and also the other co-chair and the chair and the rest of the commission.
Thank you, Ben. I did raise that point because you did it at the very beginning of the meeting, and there may have been people who joined subsequent to the roll call.
I promise I've been keeping track, but I'll make just weren't available.
Well, I thank you all for your participation tonight, and we'll see where we go. Is there a motion to
move that we adjourn? Thank you for a great meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded.
Excellent. Do we have who? Okay, that's great. Okay, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.